Teddy Talks.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Teddy Talks After Hours, the show in which we pause, rewind, and unpack each episode, and the puns still continue. You're welcome. This is for grown-ups only, so maybe you've dropped off your kiddos at school, or maybe they're off to bed, and now we can talk sort of straight up to parents, educators, and adults out there listening. So I'm here with Kelley Coleman, our guest on Teddy Talks today, and Kelley is a mom and an author. Her book is called why do I keep messing that up? Everything no one tells you about parenting a disabled child, your guide to the essential systems, services, and supports. And Kelley, I would love for you to just start off with sharing with our listeners what prompted you to write this book.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, as you mentioned, I'm a mom. I have two amazing kids, one of whom has multiple disabilities. And I started this book because when we entered into this journey of parenting a child who is disabled, I knew nothing, not about any of this, not about disability on one hand, but then on the other hand, about all of the paperwork and the planning and the stuff that I would need to do in order for my kid to succeed and have all the supports in place that he needs. So this is the book that I wish I had at the beginning of my journey. And if I'd had it, I could have spent way less time doing all the paperwork and stressing out and more time just loving my kid for exactly who he is, he's a pretty great kid.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it is something that, parents don't realize comes along with this journey. And as a school psychologist myself, I'm very comfortable talking about paperwork, and there's all of these three-letter acronyms that parents need to learn, and IEP and 504 and OHI and all of these things that I think maybe as a school system, we underestimate how overwhelming that can be for a parent who's not only coping with what they're coping with, but also to add that layer of bureaucracy on top of getting your kid what they need.
So I'm so glad you brought up the layer on top of everything else, because parents coming into this are often emotional and coming with this feeling of inadequacy because everyone's sitting across from them, whether it's at a school meeting or a doctor's appointment or even at the playground, probably knows a lot more about this than they do and has gone to school and has learned this and has been doing it for years. But as parents, we are almost always starting from zero.
Yeah. And I think as a school psychologist, I can relate to that. I would always, even in meetings, I would always physically sit next to the parent. I'm like, we are arm in arm together. I may have expertise about the law and the services, but mom always has expertise about what works for their kids, right? So I see it as a really great partnership. And if school psychologists can be a bureaucracy Sherpa to help families through that, I think it's a very important role that educators, and for all you educators out there listening, can really listen to. So right here on the after show, one of the first things we do is we pause about and unpack this episode. So Kelley, this episode, as you know, was all about helping children understand what disabilities are. So why is this topic of talking to kids about disabilities openly so important to you?
Talking openly about disabilities with everybody, and especially with kids, is so important to me, not only because my child is disabled and disability is a big part of our lives, but it is actually a big part of everyone's life. And you already know disabled people. They may not have revealed to you that they're disabled. You know people who will become disabled. And the more that we talk about disability as a natural occurring part of just being human, it dispels so many myths of disability being scary or specifically undesirable or prevents you from doing all of the things. And instead of starting out from a place of, whoa, this is scary, you can start from a place of, whoa, you're a person. You're like me in some ways. You're different than me in some ways. And it just lets the air out of the balloon in such a healthy way. And it allows kids to grow up feeling like disability is just a part of the world, because it is.
I think that's so powerful what you've just said. And that's really what we try to do here on Teddy Talks, is to nurture kids' innate curiosity. Because to tap into my friend, Mr. Rogers. When you're curious, you're learning. And so in this episode, the Teddy twins learned all about the difference between visible and invisible disabilities, and that it's okay to notice differences about others. And they also learned, I think, one of the most important lessons as a school psychologist that I like to teach students is about accommodations and supports and giving people what they need, like a service dog, for example, that can make things more accessible for people with disabilities. Can we talk for a moment about this term accessible? Sometimes kids will say things like, hey, that's not fair, like Grizzle did, if someone gets something different. I'm thinking about even things like extended time on tests for students with disabilities and learning disabilities or ADHD. And so sometimes I say things like, what's fair is giving everyone what they need. Can you speak a little bit about the difference between fairness and accessible language we use with kids?
Yes, I think parents need to have this conversation with each other and with their partners in school and everything, because the first step is encouraging kids to say out loud what is going on inside of their head. And it is so much better for your kids to verbalize, oh, that kid looks different and I'm not comfortable. And then you can talk about that in the same way that it's important for your kid to say, hey, that's not fair, so that you can have a conversation. So don't ever discourage them from telling you what's on their mind, even if the red light in your brain is saying, oh, that's wrong. We gotta undo the language here. So exactly like you said, fair can be a really tricky word. And I like to talk about giving everyone what they need in order to succeed. I'm very short. I need a big step stool to change the light bulbs in my house. My husband does not. That is a very simple example. And like you're saying, with time on tests or my son bringing his service dog out to the grocery store, it is a support that someone gets so that they have as much opportunity to succeed as everybody else. And you know what? You don't need the supports in that way, but in your life, you will need different supports in different ways. We all have different needs, and always ask the questions and start exactly like you said by being curious. And instead of saying that's not fair, you can be curious about why they need a different support and know that you will need a support at some point for something in your own life.
I love how you put that. And I love the concrete example. So if you're a parent or an educator out there working with young kids, sometimes we have to get really concrete because accessibility seems like a big thing. And sometimes you can use a very simple example like, if Kelly scrapes her knee and needs a Band-Aid, do I give a Band-Aid to the entire class? No, like Kelly's the one who needs it. She's the one who's bleeding, right? And so we can use these real world examples, but I love the idea of, and we've talked about this also with other episodes around like how to talk to kids about race and skin color, is that there's moments in the grocery store that every parent has been through where kids like, I noticed this difference. And you're like, shh. But that's what Teddy Talks is all about, is giving parents the language they need to handle those moments with curiosity. Do you think this message from today's show of accessibility and giving people what they need and appreciating neurodiversity and diversity in general is one that parents out there listening received when they were young?
I think we both wish parents were receiving this message. Myself as a parent, and I know all the parents I've talked to about this, we were taught, don't stare. Just ignore that person. Pretend like you don't see them. Pretend like you don't see their disability. And what an awful thing to be taught or told or shuffled off. The best thing to do is just to ignore that human over there. I think for myself, I had so much unlearning to do and so much relearning to do. And it's okay as parents, and even essential as parents, for us to look at what's the bias that we are coming in with, what is our own baggage, and do we need to unpack some of our own stuff so that if our inclination is to shuffle a kid away, if they say, oh my goodness, that person's face is built very differently than mine and I have all these reactions, take a moment and instead say, you're right. People are different. How cool is that? And that gives us a framework for curiosity that I think so many of us are having to learn in real time as we're parenting.
And that's something we do at Teddy Talks a lot. It's sort of unlearn and relearn. And actually, that comes to the second segment of our podcast where we rewind. So we've paused, and now we're going to rewind. We're rewind a little bit to when you were little. So you said you had some unlearning to do, and I know that as parents, we all do as well. What advice do you wish your younger self knew about disabilities?
I wish, even more so than specific bits of advice, I wish I had had real life disabled friends, whether they were peers my own age, whether they were adults in our circles. They were certainly there. I just wasn't made aware of any disabilities, learning disabilities or other. And because of that, I was just sort of making everything up. And, oh, you see someone having seizure on TV. Oh, that must be what seizures are like. They're nothing like you see on TV. You're learning from places or making things up totally on your own without the real lived experience of people who are experiencing disability firsthand. So I wish that I had had that in my life, because then I would have come from the place of, oh, these are people I love. These are my friends. And I would have learned about disability from a real place instead of relying on whatever messages were coming in from random or unreliable sources.
I think that's really wise. And I think that's why in the past, 30 or 40 years, we've really seen a movement in the schools towards inclusion, which is including, to the degree possible, people with disabilities in the general education setting. And there's so many rich opportunities for learning in that. And I know that there was a student with autism who only spoke through an iPad in my daughter's first grade class. And my daughter's like, I want to play date with her. And she had a play date with her, and they figured out ways to communicate. And isn't that different than just sort of having like only a Rain Man understanding of what autism is?
Absolutely. And it's okay for us to look at and acknowledge what our programming is. The Rain Man understanding of it is so damaging in so many ways, because it is just a tunnel vision media version. And when we're seeing real people, your daughter's friend, my son, who communicates with an iPad and told us how excited he was about his field trip to the zoo. Just because my son can't use words doesn't mean use verbal spoken words. He uses words actively on his iPad. Doesn't mean he doesn't understand everything you're saying and that's happening around him. And it's exciting when we allow ourselves to come into others' worlds.
We could have another podcast on assistive communication devices. We will geek out offline on that, because as a school psychologist, the world of technology is really exciting for students with disabilities. But that's another show, everybody.
I'm going to guess for you.
Yeah, that's great. So let's unpack this finally with at Teddy Talks, we talk about big ideas for little ears, but we have a lot of adult listeners out there right now. What is the one thing that you want the big ears listeners out there to know about how to talk to their kids about disabilities?
Of all the places where you can start talking to your kids about disabilities and also continuing the conversations, I'll come back to exactly what you said earlier, is curiosity. And if you are genuinely curious about the world around you and the people around you, it's okay to say if you don't understand something, if something makes you uncomfortable. If you see my kid eating with his feeding tube, instead of saying, say, how cool is that? Because you as a parent are curious and you are teaching your children to be curious. And find the points of commonality in your conversation. Your kid most likely does not have a feeding tube. But you know what my kid gets in the feeding tube? I make all his food in the blender, so he's getting smoothies. I bet your kid likes smoothies. We talk about smoothies with kids all the time, and they tell me what's in their smoothies. We talk about what's in Aaron's smoothies. And it's a point of commonality. And then kids are like, Mom, why don't you just feed me smoothies? And moms are like, knock it off, knock it off. Be curious, find those points of commonality, because you have those common points with every single human. And it makes disability not only not scary, but just a natural part of the diversity of people. And that's pretty cool.
I love that. I think that's a fantastic parting message for parents to model what we've talked about today, of curiosity. Now, I have a curiosity question for you. Are you ready? It's actually a very big bonus question that we ask all of our guests. So you may know, if you're a fan of the Teddy Talks podcast, that Grizzlette, who is unexpectedly wearing glasses today, for those of you who are not on video, was my actual childhood bear. Grizzle was my sister's bear. I want to ask you, do you have a favorite item from childhood, like a bear or Lovey? And did you just bring it out for me to see? And I cannot wait for you to tell me about it.
And yes, I did. And this is it's so funny because it seems gigantic.
It looks huge.
How even a big white stuffed bunny who's had about 1,000 different names. And in thinking about bringing the bunny, I was thinking about how great it is that so many of us parents get or pass along these things to our own kids, and that it just ties all of our stories together. And so whether it's my bunny or your bear or my son's skunk that sprays away the bad dreams, true story, it's so cool that these are all the things that kind of tie us together.
I love that. I want to set up Grizzle and Grizzlette and Bunny on a play date. It's the mom and me.
You can get her some sunglasses.
Yes. And I have to know, what are the iterations of this bunny's name? Because I love what children name animals.
Snowden was for a while, and there was different, of course, the bunny, the fluffy, the hop, the different people's names. My sister had a balloon she carried around for a long time that she called Hamburger Beast. So this was probably Hamburger Beast 2 at some point. So yeah, we get creative.
Well, that's what Teddy Talks is all about. It's getting creative, it's getting curious, it's learning new things. And Kelley, I can't thank you enough for being on this episode of Teddy Talks and educating us. Check out Kelley's book. Thank you so much. And we'll see you all on the next episode of Teddy Talks.
Teddy Talks. Teddy Talks. Teddy Talks. Teddy Talks.